This week on the BackTable podcast.
Advocacy and health policy are huge because nobody else is going to do it for us. No one else has our interests at the forefront of their mind other than us. So I think it's important to support the Academy in that way because they're going to support it back. Now, did I drink the Kool-Aid on this? Certainly. But I truly believe it in my heart of hearts. And I would love to discuss with somebody else how that doesn't happen or another avenue for that happening, because I don't think it exists.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the BackTable ENT podcast. We're a podcast that focuses on all things otolaryngology, and we've got a really great show for you today. Thanks for stopping by. My name is Ashley Agan. I'm a general ENT, and I am lucky today to be joined by Dr. Pete Mannis. We're going to be diving into the topic of advocacy today. Welcome to the show, Pete.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Before we get started, let me give you a proper introduction. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Peter Mannis is an associate professor at the Yale School of Medicine. He completed a residency in otolaryngology at Georgetown University Hospital and then a fellowship in rhinology and endoscopic skull-base surgery at UT Southwestern Medical Center. He's the residency program director at Yale and is the advocacy coordinator for the American Academy of Otolaryngology-Head and Neck Surgery. Welcome to the show, Pete. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your practice?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm a rhinologist. I've been at Yale for 13 years. I do anything and everything rhinology and skull-base related, including allergy, chronic sinusitis, orbit surgery, tumors, things like that. That's pretty much what I've been doing. I was the first one that was hired on staff when I got there. And then we've been really lucky enough to recruit another rhinologist there, my partner, Ryan Rimmer, who's fantastic. It's a great place. I'm from the Northeast originally, and so coming back was a nice touch.
And how did you get involved? How did you become the advocacy coordinator for the Academy?
It was a little bit by happenstance. I was at a meeting of a committee at the Academy, and someone said, we need some volunteers to help with valuation of codes. And I was sort of thinking about it. And I think the person next to me saw me thinking about it and smacks me on the arm and says, just raise your hand. So I raised my hand and I interviewed for this position as a trainee at the RUC, at the Relative Value Scale Update Committee. I got that position. And so for a bunch of years, and I actually still do it now, I'm one of the people that helps argue with CMS and with the AMA for the valuation of our codes. As a part of that, I got much more involved in advocacy. The position came up, must have been about 7 years ago now, and I applied and I was lucky enough to get it. And so I've been doing this now for about 7 years. The end is on the horizon. I think my term ends September of 2024.
Okay. And as a background, have you always had an interest in, this side of medicine, or it was just that, one committee, raising your hand that one time that kind of leapt you into it?
No, this has always been an interest, I would say not just in medicine, but in life. I was a government major in college. Everyone else was biology majors that didn't want to that wanted to go to med school. I never really cared much for invertebrates or anything like that. So I decided not to do that. And I actually spent a lot of time thinking that could be my career. I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked at the White House. I worked on a few campaigns, some local and some national. And I loved the work. I loved what you were able to accomplish, but I had a hard time with some of the politics of it. When I would work on campaigns, I sort of realized that my fate was tied to somebody else's performance, and I didn't love that. And so I took a big old turn and went towards medicine, but I still kept that interest in policy work, essentially. And that's what's enabled me to do some of the stuff that we do today.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think it's important to to have a seat at the table and, to have representation in the political space. I think it's not for everyone, but I'm glad that it's for you.
It's true. It's not for everyone. And that is perfectly fine. There are a lot of things that are not for me,
Yeah.
Hearing research was probably not for me, but we have to do that. But we have to do this stuff too. But everybody has to be at least aware of it. And everybody has to be knowledgeable about it because it really does affect everybody's day-to-day life.
Yeah. Yeah. As the advocacy coordinator, so that hat that you wear, can you talk a little bit about that position? You mentioned, so is it 4-year terms and then you're on your second term, or how does that work?
The terms were a little fuzzy at one point because there was because they were, and so but typically yes, that's about what it is. So
okay. Is it, and it was it just the position itself was created not that long ago, or it's...
No, this position has been around for a while.
Okay.
Actually, it used to be called the coordinator for health policy. It underwent a name change, but it's essentially the same position. I work very closely with the health policy team at the Academy. Some folks don't know, but we employ a specific group of people at the Academy that work on these things. I work very closely with our executive vice president, Jim Deneny, and with other physicians, part of a committee called 3P, which is called the Physician Payment Policy Committee, as well as the other committees throughout the Academy. And so we focus on a lot of different things, but really a lot of it, what it comes down to is private payer advocacy, governmental advocacy, and position statements, positions of the Academy. There does tend to be some industry relations that come into all of that as well. So it's a big tent we're under there.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a very busy clinical practice. How do you divide up your time? Like for this job, like is that, half your time, a quarter of your time?
Well,
just depends on the time of year.
It does depend on the time of year a lot. Medicare's proposed rule always seems to come out when I'm on vacation in the summer. So I've spent some vacation nights, reading through some of these things. It's like all of us, right? We're all busy. We all have a million things that we're trying to do. And if you like something and you care about it, you find the time to do it. I'm lucky. I do have some flexibility in my job. I do have some academic time that allows me to do this, because I've actually been able to publish on some of these things as well. So it ties in nicely.
Yeah, it kind of integrates, it's not like perfect little boxes. It's like it's happening together with all the other things in your life.
Correct.
So backing up, looking at this more broadly, can you just, first to set the stage, talk about, what is advocacy? Why is it important?
Yeah. I mean, to me, advocacy at its heart of hearts is really about having your voice be heard. It's really all about what you care about and making sure that the people who make decisions about these things, have influence on these things, have your opinions and the correct information with which they can make their decisions. And it's important because it's everywhere. It's in everything. If we think about some of those buckets that we talked about, how many of us as otolaryngologists have issues with private payers? 100%, unless you only work at the VA. So maybe let's back it down to 98%. What about federal legislation? Well, that does affect everyone and then has the potential to affect everyone. And these things that we think are very simple and very easy and have simple answers, they don't to the decision makers because they're hearing the completely opposite side from somebody else. And so it's so important to understand these issues and get involved in some little way. And there's a lot of ways that you can get involved with almost zero time commitment, sometimes with a little bit of money that helps too, through things like our PAC. But there's strength in numbers. When orthopedists go to Congress, when cardiologists go to Congress, they have big numbers behind them in terms of who's supporting some of their organizations. And for ENT, it's something that we haven't been as strong at, but we are getting better. And I think we will continue to get better.
I mean, we're a smaller specialty. than those specialists, than like cardiology. But I mean, there's probably also a smaller percentage of the whole of us that are participating too.
So that's really what it comes down to, is the percentages. It's not so much raw numbers, but if we can have a meeting with a congressional staffer and say, we have 20% of our members that are behind our PAC and are supporting this, and this is where this is coming from, that's much more meaningful and something that I would say, as opposed to saying something like, we have 2% of our members that are behind this or contributing to these kind of things.
Gotcha.
I think one of the nice things, there are a lot of great people in the Academy who do a lot of this work and are very, very good at it and are very passionate about it. And that's actually, I think, what's really kept this going. We have a great group of people that are really into it. We just want to see more people.
Yeah. You mentioned the PAC, so ENT PAC. Let's kind of dive into that subject for a moment. So PAC is a political action committee, right? Yeah. I think my brain, when I think about advocacy, I go straight to kind of like the PAC. Oh, we need to, you give money, that money goes to campaigns, and you help get people elected that are pro medicine or pro, ENT. Is that, how do you think of, that? I think that's a very, limited, high level, short definition. So, kind of unpack that a little more and think, talk about our PAC and what else there is.
No, I think that that's a very common thought about advocacy, because that's a lot of the advocacy that we see. We do a lot of other stuff, obviously, which we'll talk about. But for the ENT PAC, the ENT PAC is made up of a board of directors of the ENT PAC. I'm one of the members of the board. And there is staff that also assists with that. So basically what the ENT PAC does is identifies candidates that are strong on the issues that are important to otolaryngologists and tries to get them in Congress or keep them in Congress. Now, that decision is made, typically staff members will make recommendations to the board, and the board will either approve or not approve the allocation of funds, which are these donated funds that members provided to support people's campaigns. There's a funny story that Doug Backus, our president, tells about how he went to a congressional event, and the reason he was able to go was because the PAC donated money to this person's campaign fund. And Doug was running late, and the congressman, though, was waiting for him. And as soon as Doug walked in, he said, "I want to talk to you." And Doug was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I have this thing going on with my ear." And Doug's an otologist, and this worked out very well. And Doug got him an appointment the next day with one of his colleagues in DC. And it's that kind of personal connection that is so important. I guarantee that when we call this congressperson in the future for assistance, for a meeting, for help with something, they're going to take that call. And the reason that Doug was able to get into that was because of donations to the ENT PAC.
Yeah. Yeah. Once there's that kind of personal relationship, you have more than just like a name or an amount.
Yeah. When it's the person that fixed your ear, then you're happy with them. So it is, I will say ENT PAC, it's nonpartisan. So it goes to both sides, which can be challenging because there are members that we as a PAC support that probably don't share the values on certain things that a lot of our members do. And that's a little bit of a hard ask, and I recognize that completely. And I think it's just trying to remember that portion of this, it's advocacy, it's not politics. And we almost have to separate the two in order to get the assistance that we can with our issues.
And so the board of directors, those are the people who will kind of make the final say of where money is going.
Correct.
And how big is that group? How many people sit on the board?
Oh, that is a fabulous question. I believe it's about 10 to 12.
Okay. So it's a small group.
It's a small group, yes.
And how is that group chosen?
So they're people that have been involved in ENT PAC in the past. So they are active donators, and they've expressed an interest in this. And then there's an application process, and then a selection by the chair and the rest of the committee.
Gotcha. And are those positions, are they lifetime positions, or do they have terms? Or
no, they also have terms. Again, I believe it's 4 years, and you can keep re-upping those. And so people have been on it for some time. Again, you have the people that are passionate about it and that really care and that are out there and not just donating, but also interfacing with legislators.
Yeah. And you mentioned you try to kind of keep the single focus of, okay, we're just looking at the candidate's position relative to, are they friendly, to, or receptive to, are they going to represent and kind of work with us, right? As a group, do you guys ever have, situations where, it's like, well, this person, is voting, in our favor, or they've shown a record of being, pro doctor, but there's some other red flags that are popping up, like politically, like, oh, now they're saying some things, or they're in line with some politics that are maybe extreme, and maybe we don't want to help this person get elected. Does that happen, or do you guys try to just stick to the optics of where, we're looking at interest of our ENT
I don't think
members?
there's no extreme politics going on in the country these days at all. So I know you're speaking completely hypothetically, but if your hypothetical situation were actually occurring right now in this country, now I think these are things we actually struggle with. And there are these discussions that come up. And there have been conversations around these very specific topics. And we have made decisions where we said, this is a bridge too far. You can be good with us on these 2% of things, but the 98% is not so great that you think, and we can't necessarily support that. It doesn't mean, we're not actively working against something. I think at that point, we're just not supporting. And that has come up, and certainly more and more in the past 6 to 8 years. And they're hard conversations to have, because people have very valid opinions on both sides about, should we keep our focus, or should we think about what one would consider the greater good? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's good to know, someone who's listening who may be like, oh, I want to contribute, but, I don't want, my money going to elect, I don't know, so it's insert, candidate XYZ, because it's like you're thinking about like the trade-off of like, well, they're pro, medicine, and they're going to vote against, Medicare cuts, but they also are doing all of these things.
They have some other things going on, yeah. And I just
can't get on board. I don't want to trade my reproductive rights for, a little bit more Medicare reimbursement. So
no, it's, and I've had these conversations with friends. I've had these conversations with colleagues where they'll say to me, I cannot support the PAC because of these things. And I'll look at them and what else can you say other than I totally get it. It makes complete and total sense. We got to get in somehow, and we really do our best to try and thread that needle as best we can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's, there are so many things in life that are just not black and white. And I think, it's very easy to say, oh, I'm just not going to participate. I'm just going to withdraw from this process because, I just don't want to do it. But that's also not the right answer, because we need to kind of, if we're not there, if we're not, trying to be a part of those conversations and playing the game that it is, which is, a lot of campaign contributions, and that's the way it goes, then we don't have a seat at the table. We don't have those opportunities like Dr. Backus had to look in that guy's ear to get that guy's ear fixed, or gals.
It was perfect.
Anything else that we need to say about the PAC before we move on?
Other than to say to anybody listening, just make sure you donate. I'll throw that plug in. I pledged to myself a few years ago that whenever I gave a talk, I would always throw in something to the ENT PAC. So I'm glad we talked about it. And so, no, that would be my final word.
Is there a way to see where the money goes? Like what, like either before or after joining? Like, is that published, or does that work?
So it is, because this is not dark money. It's out there. And so it's all publicly reportable. In addition to that, on the ENT PAC website, there are some examples of people who we've donated to. There's a lot of physician members in Congress who get our issues. So there's a lot of contributions that go there. Leadership, both of the House and the Senate and of key committees, because those are important, because those are the people that are going to let these things actually happen. And again, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's everybody.
Okay, awesome. I think, let's see here, a good next topic for advocacy would be maybe moving into like federal legislative advocacy, because with the PAC, we're kind of, that's kind of focused on helping make sure that there are people who are elected who we have their ear, we're going to be able to, they're willing to talk to us, they're willing to work with us, and we want to support those people. And then moving the legislative advocacy part, let's talk about kind of the difference of that arm of advocacy within the Academy.
The legislative part, correct?
Yes, legislative, yeah. Federal legislative.
Federal legislation, yeah. It's very interesting. There's some issues that they just keep coming up over and over again, and we keep advocating for or against. One of them is scope of practice issues. And this is true for most medical specialties. For us, there are scope of practice issues with audiology and the ability to practice completely independently. And our point on this is fairly simple. We work very closely with audiologists. They are an important member of our healthcare team, and we want to keep that team intact. They do things that I can't do, but on that same vein, I do things that they can't do. And so we really need to keep that cohesion to avoid independent practice. So there's been bills that get brought up every year. Interestingly enough, one of the sponsors for them is Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. She's a big proponent of this. And I don't think most people know that her background, she actually has her degree in speech pathology and audiology.
I didn't know that.
So there's a personal side to this too.
Yeah.
And their argument is always that, they are able then to provide care in rural areas that don't have access to a physician. Unfortunately, if you look at numbers, they're not there either. They're not in these rural areas necessarily. So that's a big one that I would say we've been very successful at trying to maintain that healthcare team working together, because that bill has not continued to advance federally.
So what would that allow them to do that they can't do right now?
So they could diagnose medical conditions, and they basically could just be independent practitioners. And so, what's the fear? Well, the fear is a person comes in with a hearing loss and they get a hearing aid without ever seeing a physician. And it's not just hearing loss, it's an acoustic. And again, I can't fit somebody for a hearing aid. They really don't have the background to be diagnosing someone with an acoustic. So that's what it would allow them to do. And I always, it's important to us as a specialty. I hate talking about it because it's so negative. It always sounds negative, but it's not negative. It really is, look, we just want to stay together here. That's really what we want to do. Yeah. The other important federal piece of legislation that we just keep continuing to argue for is physician payment reform. Medicare is woefully underfunded. Anyone that's a physician that takes Medicare knows that and sees that. We're paid at rates that are equivalent to what we would be paid back in like 1994 if you start adjusting things for inflation. That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And so I think we all have an understanding that the current system is not working in terms of how Medicare is paid for, and there just has to be movement on that. So there's a bunch of different ideas in Congress that look at that. Some trying to tie it to inflation, which frankly makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, it's really expensive. It's a lot of money. And there's not really a huge appetite for that. I was at a meeting with a staffer once, and we were talking about physician payment reform. And their response was, well, you doctors, I see you driving your BMWs, and it was basically saying, like, you're fine. Now, I think, the thing that I did say was not much. The things that I wanted to say were, what is your salary? And let me start making some judgments about your training, your expertise, and how much you are reimbursed, because that's what you're doing to me currently. And that's not right. You can't pay people at historical rates like that forever.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about these issues and you're advocating on these issues, is that, what does that look like? Because that's separate from, the envelopes of cash when you're like working through the PAC and getting people elected. Like, it's just like you're calling and saying like, hey, I want to come up there and talk to you, or writing letters, or like, what is that advocacy actually, what's the action part of that?
Right. I love the envelopes of cash. This sounds like Watergate, like I want to be very clear on this podcast. There are no envelopes of cash. The checks are all reasonable through banking institutions and things like that. But what it looks like, it's a lot of interaction with legislators and their staff. And a lot of it actually happens between their staff and the Academy's health policy staff. They've built relations with different offices such that when there is something that comes up that we either want to be kept informed about, or want to make sure that a legislator knows our position on it, make a phone call. In addition to that, there are specific meetings with legislators and their staff, some of which are organized where, we used to have these fly-ins where a bunch of ENTs would come in, and on a Monday we would all kind of disperse and go and visit different congressional offices. And we still do that to some degree, although it obviously it changed a lot during COVID and then has kind of not quite fully ramped up yet. But I think it was last April, Doug Backus and I, we were on Capitol Hill all day, just meeting with different offices saying like, look, these are the things that are important to us, and we want to know where you stand on it. So that's what a lot of it is.
Just kind of trying to make personal connections and tell your story and, hope for the best. Yeah,
because it is really important that they hear from the people that are involved. They need to hear our side of things. And because that's where they get their information. They're not all-knowing beings. They get their information from their staff and from constituents and from interested parties. And if you can make the most compelling argument to them, well, that works.
Yeah. Are you mostly getting to speak directly with the congressperson or representative, or are you speaking with their staff, or it's a mix?
It's a mix. It's definitely a mix. Some of the Congress people we have very good relationships with, and they'll always take a meeting with us. Sometimes the staff is actually incredibly helpful. Doug and I met with one in April, and he said, "Oh, my college roommate is an ENT resident." And we were like, "Okay, here we go. Now,
we got it in.
Where is he an ENT resident? He's an ENT resident here. I know somebody there. Hold on a second." So, you spend 5 to 6 minutes talking about that. Well, suddenly it's more than just kind of walking in and saying, "Hi, how are you? Good to see you."
Yeah. Yeah. It's creating those little personal human connections.
They're important. They really are.
Yeah. Can you speak to any, particular wins or losses along the way? Like, for the person who says, "Oh, that's nice. Does that really work?" Does walking around and having coffee and shaking hands, does that really work? Does that actually make a difference?
I think, unfortunately, it does work. That's the problem. That's part of the problem of the system. I think, for years, we have been able to maintain our healthcare team with respect to audiology. So that's a win to me. There has been movement on prior authorization reforms, specifically around Medicare Advantage plans. There are wins. They're not the wins that we all want. What do we all want? We want Medicare to be paid at rates, commensurate with 2024 prices. We want to stop arguing all of these things. We want onerous prior authorization regulations to completely go away. I mean, these are the things we want. And so to me, when I think about wins and I think about losses, I do like the wins. I do think of those just personally as losses because we haven't gotten them at this point yet. But it's like the second inning. We got 7 more to go. We got a lot of time, and it's one of the reasons I like doing this stuff.
Yeah, you got to kind of think about the long game. It's all just little by little, just chipping away.
Yes, just keep plucking away.
When you're going on those meetings and you're making those calls, are you connecting with the people who the PAC supports? Like, is that, are those relationships kind of tied back in, or is that separate?
No, oftentimes it is people like that, because they're also the ones they're receptive to meetings. The other thing that we're able to do is, if we have a physician around who has either a relationship with someone or who is a constituent of someone, then we can leverage that to get some face time. The donations definitely help more, but these people are responsive to constituents. They have to be. And if they're not, then that's the kind of thing that you want to make known as a constituent, because then what are they doing? What are they there for? An elected representative does not like bad press about ignoring constituent requests.
So even if, you have a candidate that's not backed by the PAC, if you're one of their constituents, it's worth your time to go talk with them, because they should be answering to they should be listening to your concerns.
They should be responsive. I mean, it's unlikely that you would get a meeting with the representative at that point, but likely someone with their staff. This is one of those. There's a lot of different programs that the Academy has that help work on outreach. One of them is the IGO program, which I love. We have so many acronyms. I love it. And this is another one. It's in-district grassroots outreach. And it's basically a way for Academy members, otolaryngologists, to host or be a part of in-district events for elected representatives. And, the Academy can help set that out. Set that up. It's actually a very simple form that you can fill out online indicating your interest in this, or even just saying, you know what, I would love my representative to come down to my practice so they can see what we're doing here and where our struggles are and what are the things that we need. So there's a lot of ways that people can do this with not a huge time commitment.
So if I wanted to do that, I can, go fill out the form, the IGO, and then potentially I'm hosting my representative.
You can host them. You can say you want to set up a meeting at their district office. You can get information about fundraisers. You can write letters to the local papers about it. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go with those kind of things. And it's just because people can't, I don't want to say can't, but it's unlikely people are going to do that on their own. And so they need the assistance. And so again, when people talk about people often talk about what's the value of the Academy. And to me, advocacy and health policy are huge because nobody else is going to do it for us. No one else has our interests at the forefront of their mind other than us. So I think it's important to support the Academy in that way because they're going to support it back. Now, did I drink the Kool-Aid on this? Certainly. I mean, I think this is, but I truly believe it in my heart of hearts. And I would love to discuss with somebody else how that doesn't happen or another avenue for that happening, because I don't think it exists.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, because I think, for someone like me who is not well versed in the kind of the way to move around and make things happen in our political system, to be able to kind of work with the Academy and be like, oh yeah, I would like to meet and talk to my representative. What do I do? How does, tell me, where do I sign up? Like how do I send a letter? How do I call them? I think making it easy is really helpful for kind of the average otolaryngologist.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's got to be, because it's a little bit of a black box system. So you need some help getting through the door.
Yeah, it can be very intimidating to be like, oh, I need to call. And, you mentioned scope of practice and Medicare cuts. How does the Academy decide what's important to spend time and money on? Like how to, is there Is that kind of within the committees that you're on that kind of decide, okay, these are the big issues this year, where are we going to deploy our efforts?
In some respects it is, although I think a lot of those decisions mostly come with the board of directors and the executive vice president in terms of how do we allocate the work hours that the staff has. But a lot of it is also, those decisions are then driven by membership interest. So, we've talked a lot about legislative activity, but if we start talking about private payer advocacy, the things that occupy the staff's time on private payer advocacy are the issues that our members are having. And the more issues that they're having around certain something, the more time that's going to get. Or, you can look at it from a strategic way and say, look, we know that this affects everybody. We know that this certain insurance company not paying for endoscopies after sinus surgery is going to be very meaningful to a large number of our members. So therefore, we are going to put resources towards this.
Right. Yeah. Some things it's obvious, just knowing the specialty and knowing what the effect is going to have.
Right. And that's the important part then of the physician leaders that participate in this, because the staff doesn't necessarily know that. They're passionate. They're driven. I really can't say enough about them, because I think about this group of people that their job, like what they're doing, is literally trying to help us. Like, how great is that? And so
full time, round the clock.
It's full time, and they're and they're at it, and they care, and they're working, and it's wonderful to see. But then we have to step in and provide some of that clinical knowledge to help guide it.
Yeah. And when you're working with private payers, how does that, when you're trying to say like, hey, like, this is ridiculous, you're denying this, or, this is, not right. Is that, emails or phone calls or meetings? Like how do you make change, for these huge insurance companies?
The story about pushing the rock up the hill, it's eerily similar to that. I would say that's one of the hardest things that we deal with, because, and I've thought about this a lot, and I'll get to what I think are my solutions, which I don't know if will actually work, but because they don't care about us necessarily. And honestly, I've always thought, why do I have a relationship with the insurance company? I should have nothing in between them. The relationship is really between a patient and an insurance company. So how am I getting involved in this? Now, we do it mostly to advocate for patients and because we're caring individuals. So of course we're going to do it. But it typically starts with letters, and sometimes letters are unanswered, and starts with emails, things like that. We often will try and get meetings. Meetings can be challenging. A lot of times nobody shows up from their side.
You mean they'll agree to the meeting and then not show up?
And then won't show up, and then 2 days later, we got tied up, and like, yeah, well, so was I, but whatever. Anyway, or we'll get someone on the phone that says, well, this really isn't my realm, but I'm happy to listen. I'm like, well, I guess I'm happy to talk because that's what I do, but it's I don't know if we're going to get anywhere. Now, that is not always. And I don't want to paint it like that, because there are some payers we have very good relationships with, and we have very good ins with either some medical directors or things like that we can call up or we can write a letter to, and we will get a response, and they'll give us the straight answer. But the ones that we don't are the ones that I think of with the rock going up. And I had said, I think I have come up with a solution that I don't know will work, but it's certainly better than nothing. What you really have to do at this point is then start engaging patients, because they are the customers, and not just individual patients. I also think of, well, if your patient is a member of a union and they get their healthcare through that union, you have them start complaining to the union about they picked this insurance company to provide it, and this insurance company won't do X, Y, and Z. And you get enough of that could you then suddenly make some moves and move the needle? I mean, maybe, but it's certainly not us just continuing to say, have you read the article on this that says that this is safe and efficacious and good for patients? Because they have read the article and they know.
They just,
and then the final, and then the final thing I would say is you just have to make it worth it to them. So if you can make economic arguments that this could save money. So whenever I speak to companies and industry, I say, it's great. You did this randomized controlled trial. This is fabulous. Like, this looks great. You also need to write a paper about the economics of it. And you need to say why this is going to save somebody money.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to contrast we were talking about, working with our Congress representatives versus, working with the private payers, because when we're talking about trying to affect Medicare, you mentioned that our representatives are responsive to us. They care what we think. And with our third party payers, they don't really care what they don't care if we're upset that they're not reimbursing, because, as you mentioned, their customers are the patients and not us. So we can take it or leave it. And
correct.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very, very, very interesting contrast. Have you had success in engaging your patients to do that? Is that a hard ask to say, okay, make sure you do your sinus rinses and call your and don't forget to call your insurance company and complain.
I have had some success in very individual cases, and mostly centered around surgery, where surgeries were getting denied. And I said, you call them, because I've called them. And, and honestly, at that point, you have the relationship with the patient. The patient likely trusts you. You can demonstrate to the patient that you have been working on their behalf. And you ask them, or you tell them what's that. You say, look, can you try this now? And they often are receptive. And that often has helped, but it's such a case-by-case basis. Have I ever been able to engage a patient or group of patients to make change on a wide scale? Unfortunately, no.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think it would be unique. I mean, each patient's situation is unique too, so it's kind of hard. But is that successful when the patient calls? Do they sometimes get things changed, removed?
Mostly with surgeries. I not as a little bit with medications. Sometimes, they've been able to get exceptions, things like that.
Gotcha. You mentioned position statements as one of kind of like the big tools that the Academy has in advocacy. What role does the position statement play? How does the Academy decide, okay, we're going to put out a position statement about XYZ, and then how does that play out? How does that position statement affect, what are the downstream effects? Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've learned over this time is that people read these things. They are actually very meaningful. And I say this with a little bit of jest, but you will see our position statements quoted in payer policies and footnoted. And they will also at times say, well, your position statement says X. You're now saying Y. And so what are you talking about here? So they're actually very powerful. And so they typically start at the committee level. Committee member has something, or committee member or committee has a topic that they think the Academy should have a position on. And oftentimes they'll write it. And it gets submitted to 3P. And 3P goes over it, and I would say most often makes some suggestions, makes some comments. We kind of look at it from basically a payer issue and through that lens.
I don't think we defined 3P. I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm sorry.
You, but before, can we do like a quick definition of 3P? Just to just so we have that background.
Absolutely. So 3P stands for the Physician Payment Policy Work Group. It's a group of physicians that work on a variety of different things like reimbursement, position statements, things like that. It's a group of engaged people. As the advocacy coordinator is the chair of it. There's people that work on the CPT side that do the creation of codes. There's people that work on the valuation of codes. And then there's other interested folks from private practice, academics, all kind of coming together to sort of serve as an advisory group in this realm.
Got it.
And so 3P looks at these position statements, makes some edits if needed, sends it back to the committee. Once it's done and approved by 3P, it then goes to the board for approval. And if the board approves it, it goes on our website and becomes the official position of the American Academy of Otolaryngology-Head and Neck Surgery. One of the things I think we've developed over the past bunch of years is now a system for updating these, which is really important. And that's where we run into the trouble where we say, well, your position statement says this, but now you're saying this. Well, maybe because this one kind of got lost in the sauce a little bit and didn't get updated in the way it should. We have a much better system for that now where really these are all looked at about every 5 years. So.
Okay. And so is it safe to assume that since they are kind of coming through the 3P work group, most position statements are going to have something to do with physician payment?
Not necessarily.
Or not necessarily. Okay.
No. One of the ones that we worked on recently was about the safety of button battery technology, which really has nothing to do with reimbursement. But what we can do is look at it with some form of that lens, or at least some form of the health policy advocacy lens to make suggestions about language or certain things that we can say or can't say. But they really, most of them, the vast majority of them really are clinical.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you're not putting out a statement that is going to shoot you in the foot or something. That's
Correct.
Like once it's with the lens of of payment or policy, it may be okay, interesting. So you have those different filters.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so position statement. So once it's out there, then that's something that can be used. Like, for example, if you are trying to fight for, coverage for a procedure or something like that, you can say, well, our academy official position on this is, and you can kind of use that as bargaining power with your communications with insurance payers.
Correct. And it also provides the information for the clinician to say, okay, actually, here's all the evidence for this. And it's nicely summarized in this document. And here are all the references. And so it's a little bit of a one-stop shopping for that.
Gotcha. And so for people, if I was like, hey, I think there should be a position statement on, XYZ, that comes through the committee. So you would want to communicate with one of the committees within the academy to try to help drum up support and write that.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else on position statements?
No, that's it. They're more than I thought. More than I ever thought. That's it.
But they have power, so
they do.
They're effective.
They do. I mean, it's again. I've been shocked by the number of times people have looked at carriers look at our position statements.
And there's a lot of them with various different topics. So it's worth checking out. It's on the Academy's website. There's also the Academy also has already made appeal letters and resources, right? So if I'm, having trouble getting reimbursed for a procedure, there's a good chance that I'm not the only one or the first one that's had that issue, right?
Correct.
And so what's the process? If I wanted to tap into some of these resources that exist in the Academy, how do I do that?
A lot of them are available online. They're just there. So as an Academy member, one has access to them. So again, as we're talking about value, that's another part of the value membership. And then the other aspect is, if you're having issues with something, and let's say you contact the Academy and say, I'm having issues with something. To be frank, the Academy staff does not have the bandwidth to say, okay, you, physician, individual physician, we will fight this for you. But it doesn't mean don't say anything. Because as you said, if you're having trouble with it, other people are having trouble with it. And this gets, again, to that concept of how much is it affecting members. And so when we start hearing something from this person and this person and this person, suddenly we're like, well, wait a minute. Now we have a problem. This is not just an individual issue. And now we can start to direct some of our limited resources, because they are limited, but towards fixing this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So communicating that, is there form or
health policy at entnet.org.
Okay. So that's kind of where it gets funneled. Okay. And
it does.
It's worth, just as an FYI, I'm having this issue. And then the more, if just for you to have that information. And then that way you guys can say like, oh, wow, suddenly we have lots of emails about this one issue and we can decide whether or not to tackle that.
Yeah, it is. It's important. And it's also the kind of thing where if we hear something, even sometimes from one person, and we know the company that's doing this, we'll say, oh, we know what this is. This is a trial balloon. And they would start doing this in other areas as well, unless we try and squash it right now. And the other aspect a lot of times is if we hear about something, we're like, oh yeah, we dealt with this a year ago with this different carrier. We already have a letter on this. We can send something out about this.
Yeah. That's cool. As we round it out, a couple of things I just wanted to touch on just to kind of be able to kind of let people know it's out there. The first one is the Health Policy Scholarship. What is that?
So this is something that's done through the American College of Surgeons. It's I think a 5 or 6 day course up at Brandeis University in Boston, where you apply for it, you are awarded it, and you get to attend this meeting, educational course. I think it's 5 or 6 days where you learn the ins and outs of health policy. I'm going to be slightly embarrassed to say I have not been able to apply for it because it's always like my kid's end of school right there. And I'm like, I can't do it. But there's lots of other folks I know who have done it, who have found it really wonderful. And as my kids age, I think I will be able to do it at some point, because I think it'd be interesting to at least apply. Certainly not saying I'd get it. I think it'd be interesting. But so it's open to Academy members. And so anyone that's interested in doing more in this area or learning more at this area, it's a really nice opportunity.
Cool. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the ENT Advocacy Network.
Yes, the ENT Advocacy Network. So this is opportunities to join this group, the Advocacy Network, that serves as like a group of folks that want to take an active role in either educating legislators on things and how they're going to affect people. And that could be getting back to some of these things where you're calling congressional offices, you're writing letters, things like that. All these things that we talked about, if you join the Advocacy Network, which again is just a simple online form that you fill out, you suddenly can get tied into this community that you may be called upon to provide assistance. One of the things that's really great is also if you have a relationship with someone, if you have a relationship with a legislator, I keep mentioning him, I don't know why, Doug. Thank you, Doug. Doug has a good relationship with one of the Congress people from his home state. She's a pediatrician, and they've known each other, and so those relationships are really great if you have them to let the Advocacy Network know about, because we can utilize those.
Cool. So if you've listened and you're thinking, I want to get involved, I want to learn more, then you can join the ENT Advocacy Network. And it kind of connects you with the people and the tools to be able to do that. Very cool. Last question. Can we ever expect to see you running for any sort of office, or are you going to, be...
Oh, God. What are we talking about here? It's
any aspirations to be on the other side?
I didn't know this went all 60 minutes, Mike Wallace right now, but thank you. Well, I am running for a seat on the board of directors for the Academy currently. Oh, cool. So I'm excited about that opportunity, the opportunity to hopefully continue some of this advocacy work that I've been doing. Would I ever run for office? No, I kind of like my life right now. And as we were joking earlier, politics right now is very, very messy. It's really ugly. If there was ever a shift in tone, I think I'd want to be more engaged in the process. But right now, it's bad. But having said that, I think that should not discourage, people that are interested in doing it, because we need smart people to do these things. I have a friend from college who ended up working in the White House for a while and was in like at a very high level, and used to joke that every time he went to a meeting, he kept waiting for the smart people to show up. And as he got promoted, he kept saying to himself, like, oh, wait, like, I think this is finally going to be the meeting where the smart people are. And while we do have some of them, we need more.
Yeah. I think, you've done a really good job today, just talking about that politics is about relationships, and even though things look really grim right now and there's a lot of things are really divisive, I think the more we can, come together and have those conversations and make those connections and realize like, oh yeah, my roommate's an ENT, and, all these little things, we realize we're more alike than we are different. And then we can actually start to work together more. Even if we disagree, we can disagree politely and, maybe little by little make the world a better place.
Which is what it truly used to be like. I mean,
yeah.
Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan could not have been more diametrically opposed politically, but they could also sit down and have a conversation. So this is not some pie in the sky fantasy that we're talking about here. This is something that has happened in the past and certainly can happen moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's it's a great place to maybe land this. And I want to just, thank you for all of the work that you're doing, leaning in and being, an advocate for all of the otolaryngologists, all of us in the academy. If people want to, reach out to you or learn more, I know you gave us some social media handles. I don't have them in front of me right now. Do you want to plug those?
Yale ENT and Yale Sinus, although Yale Sinus has been pretty defunct for a while. But honestly, it's if anybody has issues with this stuff or wants to talk more about it or is interested in potentially getting involved more, feel free to shoot me an email. And my email is, I think it's on every Yale website that exists because I get a million things from others. But these I would like. These are good. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. I like doing this stuff because I think it's important, and I really like trying to help each other out.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. This was fun.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, it was.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, direct message us at _BackTable ENT on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable ENT is hosted by Gopi Shah
and Ashley Agan.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles, Nick Shellcross,
Josh Spencer.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Taylor Spurgeon Hess.
Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
Administrative support provided by Jamila Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening, and see you next week.